I guess I was one of those weird children who grew up to be an equally weird man, as some would say. But I've often wondered what people will think of humanity thousands or millions of years from now. If archaeologists 10,000 years or more from now somehow uncover our lost civilization, what will they think about these humans who lived so long ago? Or take it a step farther. Have you ever wondered if there are such things as alien species, what one of them might think of the earth and its inhabitants living today? If you were the only remaining human alive on planet Earth a million years from now, and an alien species came to Earth and discovered remnants of our civilization and wanted to know more about this strange race of beings called humans, what would you tell them about the story of humanity? How would you explain to an alien race who came to Earth a million years from now, long after all other human life on Earth is gone, what these humans were like? If that task was left to me, I think here's what I'd say. In the beginning, God created a beautiful world, full of beautiful plants and animals, and fishes and birds. Then he created a man named Adam, and he created him in his very own image. Someone to tend to the planet and walk in open friendship with God himself. And he only gave Adam one rule. Don't eat from this one tree in the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when the day you eat from that tree, you shall surely die. Then God walked with Adam in the garden on a regular basis and conversed with the man about all that God had made. But the man was still lonely, lonely for companionship, for a counterpart, another human like himself with whom to relate and share all the goodness of God's creation. So God made the man fall asleep and took the emptiness of man and made a companion for him whom the man called woman, for she was taken out of man. And the two became as one. But the woman could not resist eating from the forbidden tree, and she shared the fruit with the man, and he also ate. And although they did not die physically right away, they did die inside. Something in them spiritually died, and they became mortal. And they both immediately became aware that they were not wearing any clothes, something that they had never noticed before. So when God came looking for them as he normally did, they hid from him. When he called out to them, they said they hid because they were afraid of him because they were naked. And he asked them, "Who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree which I told you not to eat from?" And the man blamed the woman who gave him the fruit. And the woman blamed the serpent who had pointed out the tree to her. And at one point they even blamed God. So God sent them away from the beautiful garden to struggle to grow enough food to survive in a world that was suddenly hostile to them. For thousands of years, the couple and their offspring, known as humanity, struggled to know God, to know his will, and to do his will. For the most part, they struggled unsuccessfully, with only a few exceptions. At one point, things got so bad that God decided to wipe out almost all of humanity, save one family, and to start over with Noah, his family, and the animals that he carried with him on the ark. More time passed until God found a man named Abraham and challenged him to walk before him and be blameless. And in return, God would help Abraham's aged wife Sarah to bear a son, through whom Abraham's offspring would become like the stars of the heavens or the grains of sand on the beach. And God would lead him to a land flowing with milk and honey that would be his and his descendants forever. And that through Abraham's offspring, all of the families and nations of the world would be blessed. Abraham fulfilled God's desire, and God did bless him with a son, whom he named Isaac. Isaac in turn had two sons of his own, Jacob and Esau. Esau the elder, who both went on to father 12 tribes of their own children. But Isaac blessed Jacob the younger. So God honored that blessing and changed Jacob's name to Israel. And through Israel's 12 sons, God promised to bless all the nations of the earth. Israel's son Joseph was sold by his brothers out of jealousy into slavery in Egypt. But God blessed Joseph so that everything he touched prospered. And in time, God raised him up to be the second highest in all of Egypt, next only to Pharaoh. And God used Joseph in that position to save his entire family from starvation during a famine that struck that entire part of the world. Israel's descendants multiplied until they became a threat to the stability of Egypt. So the Pharaoh made them all slaves. For 400 years they labored in slavery, waiting for God to send them a deliverer to lead them out of Egypt and back to the promised land that he had promised Abraham all that time ago. Finally, God did send them a deliverer named Moses, who was rescued by his mother and sister and Pharaoh's daughter from being killed just for being a baby boy and threatening the stability of Egypt. And Moses was raised as part of Pharaoh's household. But when he became a man, he saw how the Egyptians were abusing his people, and in one instance he rose up and killed an Egyptian slave master who was abusing one of his people. And then he was forced to run away in exile, where he lived for 40 years. Then God appeared to Moses in a bush that was on fire, but somehow was not consumed. And God sent him back to Egypt to lead Israel out of bondage. And God enabled him to work many amazing miracles, to bring Pharaoh down and humble him before the Lord, the God of Abraham. Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt and across the Red Sea, where Pharaoh's chariots pursued them and were drowned. But the people disobeyed, refusing to cross into the promised land, so they wandered for 40 years until the entire generation who had disobeyed had died in the wilderness. Then God empowered Joshua to lead the people into the promised land of Canaan, and God drove out or destroyed all of the inhabitants of the land before the people, and they were given a land flowing with milk and honey. But the Israelites had a persistent problem. They loved to worship idols. And when they did, God would withdraw his hand of protection from them, and they would be overrun by their enemies until they repented. Then God would send a deliverer, someone like Samson or Gideon or Deborah or Baruch, and he would rescue his people from their oppressors. And they would follow God for a while, but then they would turn back and go to worshiping the idols once again. Eventually, the people wanted to be like the nations around them, so they asked God for a king. So God gave them a king. But most of the kings that they had led the people away from God instead of leading them closer to God. And finally, after God had had enough of the kings and the people's disobedience and their disloyalty to him, he allowed the Babylonians to come and take them out of the land, and they were removed from the promised land for 70 years. Then God allowed a remnant of the people to return to the promised land to rebuild. But they were under the control of foreign powers almost constantly for the next 400 years. The Persians, the Greeks, the Romans dominated the land and the people. But the people were allowed to worship their God throughout this time, even having their temple rebuilt for them by the same powers that dominated them. Then, on a starry night in the tiny village of Bethlehem, God sent his only begotten Son, Jesus, to be born into a stable to a virgin girl named Mary and her espoused husband, Joseph, who would raise him as their own, all the time knowing that he was the Lord's child. When he was 30 years old, their child began to travel around, preaching that the kingdom of heaven is suddenly upon you. Those people who had once waited for 400 years for God to send them Moses, and now had waited 400 years for God to send the Messiah, finally had their deliverer, sent by God to free them from oppression. But the oppression that they wanted to be freed from was not a spiritual oppression, it was physical oppression. They wanted their own land, they wanted their own government, they wanted their own kingdom. They wanted to be free, to have their own economy. They weren't interested in spiritual salvation. They wanted physical salvation. But God didn't send that kind of a deliverer this time. You see, that didn't work the first time when God gave them all of those things. They just turned away from him over and over again. But this time he brought them spiritual liberation from the power and the punishment of sin and reconciliation with him once and for all. He worked many miracles of healing, this son of Mary and Joseph did. He healed people from blindness, from deafness, from paralysis, from physical defects of all kinds, even untreatable sicknesses like leprosy and demon possession, even raising people from the dead, one after being dead for 4 days. But the people didn't care about those things enough. They didn't approve of his message of forgiveness and love, even for their enemies. They did not want spiritual liberation. They wanted political and physical liberation. So they had him put to death in the cruelest way possible. But God did not leave him in the grave. Instead, he used his son's sinlessness as a tool to pay the price for the sinfulness of all humanity, and he bridged the gap between himself and humanity once and for all. And his resurrected Son was exalted to sit at the right hand of the Father in heaven, and the Spirit who was active in the Son was sent to remind his followers of all that he had told them and to empower them to do similar acts of miracles and healing and to spread the good news about all that God has done for humanity through his Son. And before he left earth for the last time, God's Son promised to return to take all of those who believe in him to be with him and the Father forever someday. And then one day, after thousands more years, after those he left behind and their successors had led billions into a loving, saving relationship with the Father, the Son split the eastern sky, and instantly all those who had ever believed in him were brought back to life, and those who were still alive and believed in him rose along with them to join the Lord in the air where they would be with him forever. Somehow they were transformed into a new form of being altogether, beings who looked just like the one who created them, yet each one somehow unique in his or her own way. And together with the Son, they journeyed across the universe faster than the speed of light, after taking a couple of laps around the cosmos so they could take in all of the beauty that their Father had created. They entered into a whole new dimension, one that transcends time and space, and they are with him and the Father and the Spirit even now and forevermore. That's what I would say to those aliens who wanted to know about the human race. This week, we will remember the moment that God's Son was born into this world to Mary and to Joseph and began his journey through this earthly life as a human being to make it that everlasting existence a real possibility. This is how Jesus came to be born into this world. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. And in the same region there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear. And the angel said to them, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. You will find the babe wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased." When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had seen and heard, as it had been told them. And at the end of 8 days, when he was circumcised, he was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it was written in the law of the Lord, "Every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord," and to offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit was upon him, and it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And when he came in the Spirit to the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, "Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory to your people Israel." And his father and mother marveled at what was said about him. And Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, "Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed. And a sword will pierce through your own soul also, so that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed." And there was a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was advanced in years, having lived with her husband 7 years from when she was a virgin, and then as a widow until 84. She did not depart from the temple, worshiping with fasting and prayer night and day. And coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. As we celebrate the greatest gift that mankind has ever received this week, I want to take note of the fact that there were at least 4 different groups of people who were looking for Jesus during the time frame of his birth and his infancy. First, there were the shepherds. They sought him. Then there were the Magi who sought him. Then there were Herod and his soldiers who sought him. But there was also Anna and Simeon who were seeking him as well. The shepherds sought him out of curiosity, and because the angel had instructed them to do so, they found him just as they had been told they would, and they went everywhere telling everyone of all that they had heard and seen. The Magi sought him out of awe and respect and wonder, and when they found him, they worshipped him and gave him valuable gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Then they went home a different way, rather than to return to Herod to report what they had found. Herod and his men sought Jesus not out of curiosity, nor to worship or honor him, but to destroy him before he could become a threat to the status quo, especially where Herod was concerned. Then there were Anna and Simeon, who waited patiently for the Lord to come into this world, to be revealed to them, so that they could know beyond any doubt at all that God was in the process of redeeming his people. But the vast majority of people didn't seek him at all. Either because they didn't know what was happening around them, or because they just didn't care. And it's interesting that the same situation exists today. While some seek Jesus out of curiosity and may tell others about him, in the end they go on with their lives and little, if anything, changes. Others may seek him to honor him and respect him and worship him, and when they have encountered him, they go home a different way. Their lives are changed, altered, transformed as a result of their encounter with the Lord. Still others seek him not out of curiosity or out of respect or honor, but to destroy him, his reputation, the truth about who he is, to snuff out his influence in the world. And then there are others who are just patiently waiting for God to reveal the salvation that he has promised once again. First with Moses, then with Jesus on the cross, and now we wait for him to come back a second time to take his brothers and sisters home, to be with him and the Father forever. An interesting fact about Herod, by the way, is that after trying so hard to destroy the Christ child and to hold on to power within about 2 years of his edict to kill every male child 2 years and under in order to try to get rid of Jesus, Herod himself was dead and gone, along with all those who had sought to harm the child. I've often said that the most dangerous place to be in the universe is to be between God and someone he is determined to save. Those who seek to destroy the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ are putting themselves in a very precarious place. But the vast majority of people today, just like when Jesus was born, are either oblivious to what God is doing through Jesus, or they're just too busy to be bothered with it, or they just can't make themselves believe that it can have any real effect on their everyday lives, so they just don't bother seeking him at all. There's a familiar expression that I believe applies here, and that is that wise men still seek him. But seeking him is only part of the story. The real question is, what will you do once you have found him? Will you, like the shepherds, get excited for a little while, praise and honor and glorify God, tell other people about him, but then just go on with your everyday life? Will you, like the wise men, honor and worship him, give unto him valuable possessions, and perhaps the most valuable possession of all, your very life? And will you go home a different way? Will you live differently because of your encounter with Christ? Or will you end up bringing discredit to him, even serving to destroy people's ability to believe in the truth of the gospel with your cynical, unbelieving response to him? Will you be just too busy to be bothered with it, thinking all of this is just a waste of time and energy? Or will you, like Anna and Simeon, celebrate the fact that God is doing something new, something fresh in this world? God is still in the creating business, I believe. He is in the business of recreating humans who come to him, seeking him, desiring him, and desiring his salvation. spiritually. Ironically, it also tends to work out that once God has saved a person spiritually and transformed them spiritually, their physical world begins to change as well for the better. At this time of year, this festive, celebrative time of year, with all of the beauty that's around us, the lights and the candles and the presents and the trees and all of the joy that accompanies this season, obviously this year we're struggling to try to keep things anything like normal. So many have been lost. So many are still struggling. So many are living in constant fear that they might catch this virus that could take them out of this world. Many have died from other causes in the process, and it's been a very difficult year for all of us. Some have lost homes, some have lost businesses, some have lost their lives because of this virus and the response to it. But this is the kind of world that God came into. It was a broken, messed up, messy world, dominated by governments that didn't really care about the people wrapped up in their own everyday lives, worried about this and worried about that. These were the people that God came to, the people that Jesus eventually would say, "Cast your cares upon me. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, for I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and you will have rest for your souls." I think maybe what we need more than anything else this year at Christmas is rest for our souls. We need rest emotionally, mentally, spiritually, perhaps relationally, perhaps financially. So many are struggling. But we need rest. We need peace. And those can only really come from the God who made us, when we have a right relationship with Him, when we are seeking Him first and His kingdom and His righteousness. We're told by Jesus Himself that all these things that we worry about, they'll be taken care of. I hope this Christmas is a blessed Christmas for you. But more importantly, I hope that once we have celebrated His birth, we will remember what God did for us throughout the year to come, and we will, with His help, do our best to live differently than we have ever lived before, closer to Him than we've ever lived before, to walk daily with Him like Adam did in the garden before the fall. And I hope and pray that this is a blessed holiday season for you, Christmas and New Year's, and that the year 2021 will be so far above and beyond what we have experienced in the last 12 months that we will be glad to make 2020 a distant memory. God bless you. We love you. We miss you. We want the Lord's best for you. Have a great Christmas and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.